Niani Finlayson was shot by a deputy after she called 911 during a domestic dispute.
Finlayson called for help.
A woman was shot to death by officers who were responding to a call she made for help.
Shot and killed by a Lancaster deputy last month, shortly after she sought law enforcement help.
And Niani Finlayson, she was shot by a deputy after she called 911 during a domestic dispute.
That's the headline on this one. A woman calls police for help, they show up at her house and shoot her dead. The statement is true enough, but is that a fair and balanced representation of the situation? The short answer is no, and we're going to tell you why here on the Force Review. Along the way, we're going to cover topics such as warrantless entries, domestic violence, and deadly force. So stay tuned for episode 18 of the Force Review because it's packed with content. December 4th, 2023, Lancaster, California. Niani Finlayson calls 911. While there may be many pieces of information for a patrol officer to consider on their way to a 911 call, there are three main categories they should be evaluating. These categories are immediacy of the threat, potential crimes committed, and suspect description. While we play the 911 call, I'm going to have this chart going to show you what should be going on in a patrol officer's mind.
Yes, hello. I need the police here. This man, he won't get out of my house now. And I already told him to get out of my house.
Okay, stop yelling. Stop yelling. So who is he to you?
His name is... He will not leave me alone.
Ma'am, my question is, who is he to you?
Huh?
My question is, who is he to you?
Well, that's all.
Hello?
Off of me! Yes, off of me now! He's touching me!
Hello? Hello?
I need the police here right now. No, because he won't get his hands off of me, and I already told him 1,000 times.
Ma'am,
get his hands off me.
Ma'am, walk away so I can talk to you.
So here's the chart that we're left with at the end of the call. That first category, threat, is high. That tells me I need to go with lights and sirens and move quick when I get there. That second category, crime, gives me the authority to detain people. It's also a guide for decision making when using force and chasing suspects. The third category, suspect, tells me who I need to detain. In this case, the only description we have is male, but we do have his name. 3 deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department show up at Ms. Finlayson's apartment.
They're yelling.
They're in the back room if they're not answering. Yep.
Let's stop right there and talk about this kick real quick. Normally, the police need a warrant to kick in your front door because your home is protected from unreasonable searches by the Fourth Amendment. But the courts have ruled that exigent circumstances may provide a legal basis for a warrantless entry into a home. In 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the case Brigham City v. Stewart. The court stated that the need to protect or preserve life or avoid serious injury is justification for what would be otherwise illegal absent an exigency or emergency. Accordingly, law enforcement officers may enter a home without a warrant to render emergency assistance to an injured occupant or to protect an occupant from imminent injury. The two key phrases here are emergency and imminent injury. So do we have an emergency? Is somebody in danger of imminent injury? Well, we don't know for sure, so we have to evaluate all the evidence we have so far. And here it is. Emergency. Imminent injury. Those terms are a little vague. To decide if kicking down the door was legal in this situation, we need a better definition of those terms, and we get that through case law. U.S. v. Holloway, 2002, U.S. Court of Appeals, 11th Circuit. Police officers get a dispatch from a 911 operator to investigate a report of gunshots and arguing emanating from a residence. En route to the call, an officer received a second dispatch from the 911 operator indicating the caller was reporting continued gunshots and arguing. On the porch of the residence was Robert Holloway and his wife. Police detain Holloway and then approach the residence to search for victims and weapons. They find a shotgun shell, a shotgun, and then they return to the residence to keep searching. The court determined that this search did not violate the Fourth Amendment. U.S. v. Brooks. Mr. Brooks and his girlfriend had been staying in a hotel together. The guests next door called police and reported what they thought were sounds of a woman being beaten. Police met with the guests in the lobby, then went to Mr. Brooks' room and knocked on the door. Through the door, the officer heard Mr. Brooks say, "Honey, I think somebody is here." When Mr. Brooks opened the door, the officer noticed that the room was in total disarray, the hotel bed was unmade, and clothes were strewn on the floor. The officer entered the hotel room without receiving consent. Mr. Brooks argued that this warrantless entry violated his rights under the Fourth Amendment. The court concluded that the officer had cause to know that Brooks and his girlfriend had argued, and in the total circumstances there was a fair probability that an assault had occurred. Thus, the court held that it was objectively reasonable for the officer to believe that the girlfriend might have been in danger, and this exigency rendered lawful entry without a warrant to come to her aid if there was a need. Tierney v. Davidson, Court of Appeals, 2nd Circuit. Vermont State Police receive a report of a domestic dispute at Maureen Tierney's home. The anonymous caller reported a bad domestic dispute in progress, and there had been previous domestic disturbances at the same house, and this episode was the worst yet. As the officer drove down the road near the house, he saw two men on the road and approached them. One of them said his wife had called the police. They pointed out a residence and told the officer that this had been the scene of prior domestic altercations, that this was the worst yet, and they heard screaming and banging up until the officers approached. Tierney's residence was quiet as the officer approached it. Behind a screen door, the door to Tierney's residence was closed and locked with a broken glass pane through which a hand could reach. The officer opened the door through the broken pane and entered the house without knocking or identifying himself. In writing their opinion for this case, the court noted that courts have recognized the combustible nature of domestic disputes and have accorded great latitude to an officer's belief that warrantless entry was justified by exigent circumstances when the officer had substantial reason to believe that one of the parties to the dispute was in danger. Here, there is little doubt that it was reasonable for Davidson to believe that the search was justified by exigent circumstances. This situation satisfied the exigent circumstances exception. Fletcher v. Town of Clinton, U.S. Court of Appeals, 1st Circuit. 1997, Lori Fletcher obtained an ex parte domestic violence restraining order against her abusive boyfriend, William McDonald. McDonald was ordered to stay away from Fletcher and her residence. Two Clinton police officers drove by her house and saw McDonald there. The officers were aware of the restraining order and past occasions on which Fletcher had sought police help. Police entered Fletcher's home despite her objections and her assertion that McDonald was not in the house. A fracas resulted during which Fletcher was arrested and McDonald escaped. The court concluded that a reasonable officer could have concluded that both of the warrantless entries into Fletcher's home were justified by the threat to Fletcher's safety. Story v. Taylor, United States Court of Appeals, 10th Circuit. Police receive an anonymous call for a loud argument at Michael Story's address. When police arrive at the residence, they hear no argument. They knock on the front door and Michael Story answered. Mr. Story admits that his wife was arguing. Police ask if his wife is here now. He says no. They ask if anybody else is in the house, and Mr. Story says his dogs are there. Police ask about the argument. Mr. Story refuses to talk about it. The police ask him to step out of the house. He says no. Then the police pull him outside, handcuff him, and arrest him. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Story's wife arrives home and talks with the officers. The court ruled that in this case, police did not have exigent circumstances to enter Mr. Story's home. The court commented that a report of a domestic argument standing alone does not demonstrate exigent circumstances per se. Thus, officers responding to a report of a domestic dispute must point to something beyond the mere fact of an argument to demonstrate an objectively reasonable basis to believe there is an immediate need to protect the lives or safety of themselves or others. Okay, we did our research, read our case law. Now it's time to determine if our facts support a warrantless entry into Miss Finlayson's apartment. To do that, we compare the facts and decisions of our case law to the facts of our current case. After doing so, I have determined that a warrantless entry into Miss Finlayson's apartment was justified. Time to move on.
Hold on.
Hey, come out.
Yeah, I'm gonna stab him because he pushed my
So now the police just saw Miss Finlayson and spoke with her. She seems okay and she's not being assaulted. So is there still an emergency that would justify a warrantless entry into Miss Finlayson's apartment? Yes. This justification is based on 3 factors. Number 1, consent. Miss Finlayson called the police and opened the door for him. Number 2, the safety of Miss Finlayson. She just retreated out of view during a domestic dispute that has clearly not cooled down. Number 3, there's a threat of imminent injury to the male still inside the house. Miss Finlayson is holding a knife and just said she was going to stab him.
Go. Give me a taser.
The police fire 4 shots, killing Miss Finlayson. So was this shooting justified? To figure that out, we need to review California Penal Code Section 835A. It states, a peace officer is justified in using deadly force upon another person only when the officer reasonably believes, based on the totality of the circumstances, that such force is necessary to defend against an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or another person. There's 2 phrases in that statement that I'm going to analyze. The first is reasonably believes. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of deadly force laws. The law doesn't restrict the use of deadly force to only those situations where it is necessary to protect against the threat of death. It allows the use of deadly force when a person reasonably believes it's necessary. That distinction is huge, as this incident will demonstrate.
Okay, stay right there. Do not move. Stay right there. Just stay over there.
Please, sir. Please. Please. Please don't do that.
73, I got a guy with a gun. I'm not doing anything. Look, I'm not doing, don't shoot. Don't shoot. I'm not. Don't shoot.
Is it necessary for this Oklahoma City officer to shoot this man to protect himself? The answer is no.
I'm finna shoot your ass. Don't drop the gun.
I don't have it. Look. I don't have it. I don't have it. Shots fired. The guy has a gun over here. Isabella.
Nobody was shot during this incident. That round fired was by the officer and it did not hit anybody. Antoine Hill went on to break into a family member's apartment, barricade, and was later arrested by a tactical unit without any shots fired. Now, it may not have been necessary to shoot Mr. Hill during this incident, but at this point, was it reasonable for the officer to believe it was necessary? Of course it was. Mr. Hill is pointing a gun at the officer and saying he's going to shoot him. So why is there a discrepancy between what's necessary and what reasonably appears to be necessary in the moment? The answer is simple. The future is hard to predict. The best we can do is evaluate the evidence and make a reasonable decision going forward, just like the deputies had to do when they decided to kick in Miss Finlayson's door. The second phrase within California's deadly force law that I want to analyze is imminent threat. There are 3 factors that must be satisfied for a threat to become imminent: ability, opportunity, and apparent intent. So does Miss Finlayson have the ability to inflict serious bodily injury or death on the male? Yes, she's holding a knife. Does she have the opportunity to inflict serious bodily injury or death? Yes, she's standing right next to him. Does she have the intent to inflict serious bodily injury or death? This is the most difficult factor of the 3 to figure out. So just like always, we're going to evaluate our evidence and make a reasonable decision. Here's the evidence in favor of Miss Finlayson's intent to stab the male. Number 1, she appears angry with him. From her 911 call, to the screaming heard on scene, to her comments to the officers at the door, everything points to the fact that Miss Finlayson is upset with the man. Number 2, Miss Finlayson has armed herself with a knife. Number 3, Miss Finlayson explicitly stated she was going to stab him. This is the most powerful piece of evidence. Number 4, she walked close to the man, within stabbing range. Now let's take a look at the evidence against Miss Finlayson's intent to stab the man. Number 1, it would not be rational to stab him at this point. Miss Finlayson called the police for help and opened the door for them. Why would she stab the man at this point? This next argument comes from Miss Finlayson's family's lawyer, Bradley Gage, so I'm going to let him tell it.
She walks in the opposite direction towards the man on the sofa, holds him with one hand and the knife with the other. Attorney Gage, is it not a reasonable belief that she will then use that knife to do what she said she would, to stab him?
It was not a reasonable belief to do that. First of all, they knew that over 16 minutes, Niani was on the phone with 911, screaming and holding a knife during that time frame. If she was going to use it and inflict serious injury, she would have done it 16 minutes before these deputies arrived.
So I didn't read that anywhere, that Miss Finlayson was on the phone for 16 minutes with the police before they arrived. But for our purposes right now, I'm going to assume that Bradley Gage is correct, which is actually a bit of a leap, considering some of the other stuff he said that turned out to be false. Like this.
Niani was sitting on the ground when she was shot in the back.
And this.
But we also know that when the officers shot, they were outside, so they were not in danger. They did not have a very good line of sight at all.
Now, I'm not sold on Mr. Gage's argument that no stabbing for 16 minutes meant no stabbing in the future, but I'll throw it up anyways. So here's all our evidence, for and against intent. Now, you could argue counterpoints to all of the points we have listed here. Perhaps Miss Finlayson had good reason to be angry with the man. Perhaps he hit her like she said on the phone, and she just armed herself with the knife to protect herself. Maybe her statement about stabbing the man wasn't serious. After all, this guy never shot the Oklahoma City cop like he said he was going to.
I'm finna shoot your ass.
And maybe she just walked up to the man to grab him by the arm to pull him out of the house. You could also argue counterpoints to all the points against intent as well. This first point here, that stabbing the man wouldn't be rational, can easily be explained away by the simple fact that people don't always act rationally, especially in heated domestic violence situations. For example, this lady here called the police for help. As for Mr. Gage's argument that she hadn't stabbed the man for 16 minutes, which he argues means that she was never going to stab him, this is just not a valid argument. People can change their minds, situations can change, etc. After evaluating everything, I've determined that there is strong evidence to support the idea that Miss Finlayson intended to stab the man, and the officer reasonably could have inferred as much. Now, there is one more matter we have to consider before we decide if this shooting was justified. California law regarding the use of deadly force for police officers is probably the most extensive one in the country. It has a section that I haven't seen in any other state laws. California Penal Code Section 835A2 says that police officers shall use other available resources and techniques if reasonably safe and feasible to an objectively reasonable officer. This means that if the deputy could have protected the man on the couch by using other means other than shooting Miss Finlayson, he should have done so. So what other resources did he have available to him? Anything close range, such as a baton or his hands, are out. They would place him in unreasonable danger. Pepper spray has more of a range. It is extremely painful and could limit Miss Finlayson's vision, but it has no real stopping power. It would do nothing to stop Miss Finlayson's muscles from functioning normally, and she could easily still stab the man. Which brings us to the police taser. When tasers work as designed, they have the potential to stop a deadly threat without serious injury. Well, the argument against the taser is that it doesn't always work, such as in these situations.
Drop the knife! Taser! Taser, taser, taser! Get down! Shooters! Shooters!
493 King Boulevard. Code 3 and 7448.
In 2019, American Public Media released a report in which they published statistics on the effectiveness of tasers. Among these departments, effectiveness ranged from 57% to 79%. If the taser had failed and Miss Finlayson had lunged at the man, it could have resulted in her and the man getting killed. This is what happened in Will County, Illinois in 2021.
Put the knife. Stop right there. Put the knife down. Put the knife down. Listen to me, please. Put the knife down. Please, please. Stop right there. Stop right there. No, no, please. Put the knife down. I will not put this knife down. All I want to do. Put the knife down. My mother. Step. Put the knife down now. Put it down. Put it down now. Stop.
Deputies ended up killing both the victim and the suspect in this situation. Also, if the deputy had chosen to use a taser, and the situation ended with the man on the couch being seriously injured or killed, the deputy would surely have faced criticism and a lawsuit for choosing a non-lethal weapon during a deadly force situation. There's also the chance that he could have been criminally prosecuted for failing to protect the man. Baltimore, 2020. Officer Christopher Nguyen is dispatched to a fight in progress. He encounters a victim on the ground, badly beaten. Then he encounters the suspect, Kenneth Summers.
Bring your what?
Are you fighting with him?
Bring the title to the Lincoln.
What happened?
Stole my car.
Mr. Summers eventually goes over to the victim and kicks him in the head.
Bel Air Road and Sinclair Lane.
Bel Air and Sinclair?
Yeah.
What's the name of that shop?
Got autos. Hey, can you see yet? Can you see? I want you to look at me real quick.
Hey, what's the name quickly?
So you can remember me.
What's the name?
Hey, forget.
Hey, okay, that's enough. That's enough.
I ain't worried about that.
All right.
Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Turn around. I will tase this out of you. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Put your phone down and put your hands behind your back. All right, I'm putting this down. Put your phone down.
Officer Nguyen immediately detains Mr. Somers after the kick, but it's too late for Officer Nguyen. He is eventually arrested, charged, and convicted of reckless endangerment for failing to protect the victim.
I mean, dude, I got no attacks on you, alright? Straight up, I got none for you.
But even if that Baltimore case was a fluke, it still puts that precedent out there for officers to consider when dealing with suspects. It sets the precedent that an underreaction could be just as devastating to their careers and freedom as an overreaction. Well, that's about everything the deputy had to consider before using deadly force. And it is a lot considering he had only a few seconds to make a decision. But the California Penal Code does take into account the difficulty in making split-second decisions. 835A.4 says that the totality of the circumstances shall account for occasions when officers may be forced to make quick judgments about using force. After careful consideration, I've determined that this shooting was justified, and this deputy should not be prosecuted. And that will do it for part 1 of episode 18 of the Force Review. For part 2 of episode 18, for the first time on the Force Review, I'm going to talk about what everybody could have done better, both the deputies and the civilians. I'm also going to talk about how to handle a domestic violence call, from start to finish. I've been on patrol for 14 years and I've seen a wide variety of situations involving domestic violence. So I've developed a system of best practices for police to follow. So please hit that subscribe button if you want to be notified when that episode comes out. It's going to be a very good one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.